So welcome to another round of virtual Apres. Thanks for showing up. Before we get started, I just have a couple of items of business. First of all, our quote for today is, "Courage is like a muscle. We strengthen it by use." That's from Ruth Gordon. Right? A couple of details here. Some of you have noticed that finding the links are a little bit differently. We now have a Google Drive, so you can click in, and really, honestly, please reach out to me. It's my pleasure to help you. If you're having trouble finding the show notes from any previous sessions, or if you maybe want to listen to a previous recording, or you want to see what the homework is for the next week, just reach out. My email is in any of the places where you found the link to get here. And you can always reach out to the office as well. They'll be happy to send you my way if you need that as well. All right? Awesome. Katie, your picture with your hand raised keeps making me think that you have something to say, which I really appreciate. All right. And then let's see. So we've got how to find this. And then it looks like everyone's already done that here, but so thank you for having at least your first name on your Zoom account. It makes it just much easier for me, and if we have any follow-up information that we want to offer you, that makes it easier for us afterwards. All right, and without further ado, I want to introduce you to our special guest today, Ann Schorling. Awesome. Ann has joined the PSIA National team, and she joined the PSIA National team in 2016. She has served the Intermountain Division as an Alpine and telemark examiner for about a decade. She has been a trainer and instructor for Jackson Hole Resort since 2018. She is the National Team People Skills Task Force Manager since fall of 2018, which I have to say, I'm quickly learning is a huge job. Additionally, she is serving
Katie can attest to that also.
on the Intermountain Advisory Committee for Education staff. Ann has worked with Knowles, formerly National Outdoor Leadership School, since 2006 as a field instructor, supervisor, and corporate leadership trainer. She attributes her work with Knowles specifically to what she's doing now with the National People Skills Task Force. Her comfort and expertise with interpersonal skills comes from 15 years of coaching students and peers. Combining the skiing and her developed skills through experience Knowles, she has also been incredibly supported by her parents, who both were ski instructors at Keystone, where her dad still teaches. In the summer, she enjoys playing on her mountain bike and has a pup, which I think most of you who've been here regularly know that I really value. That's named Sadie, who still likes to go on regular mountain bike rides. Awesome. So what I'd love to start with is tell us just a little bit about your role with the People Skills Task Force.
Okay. First off, I think you embellished my resume a little bit there.
You're welcome. You deserve it.
So my role with the People Skills Task Force is, having served on it for the last 2 years, I've evolved into being the manager, facilitator, whatever you want to call it, of the task force. And that group is charged with figuring out what people skills mean to PSIA based on a lot of research outside of PSIA, and then trying to fit that into what we do as an organization. PSIA AASI, I apologize to any snowboarders. I will try to be less ski-centric. So we're charged with figuring out what it means for us as an organization, identifying how we will, what we value, how we will assess those values, what they look like in person, and then how we will design learning opportunities moving forward to help support the values in the organization. So that's the role of the task force, and my role on that task force is kind of the facilitator, cluing into other task forces and what they're doing, making sure what we're creating works with the children's task force, and making sure that as we roll this out, it fits with what Ellen is working on in the teaching task force, and fits with like the broader organizational goals. So that is my role.
Awesome, thank you. It's a lot. I appreciate it, and I think
yeah,
many of us here do as well. Excellent. So I'd love also before we move too much into our core conversation today is to talk to us just a little bit about the difference between prescriptive versus adaptive skills and how that applies to people skills, and just helping us to kind of have a tangible understanding of what each one looks like.
Okay. So anyone who saw the InterSki presentation will have seen this. And if you haven't, one of the people ask, okay, so we've been student-centered since the 1970s. How is what we're doing now different? Like, why should I care? Why is it different? And one of the biggest differences is the difference between prescriptive and adaptive solutions. And the best way I can illustrate that is through an example. So at this point, I'm going to have you turn your mics on, and you're going to have to participate because I can't handle talking to a room of people who aren't talking. So if we, so you're all instructors. You've all been teaching, I assume, for at least a season, probably, or part of a season. So what we're going to do is just popcorn style, which means if you have a thought, say it out loud. I don't care in this moment if we overlap. When your group or individuals are walking up to you in a lesson, what are the things that you do? What are good practices when you see folks walking up to you? What do you do?
Look how they're dressed.
Say hello.
Look at them, say hello.
Smile.
See how they're carrying their equipment.
Check out their equipment. Great. Keep going.
Their jacket zipped up.
Okay, is their jacket zipped up? Yep.
Kneel down if they're little people.
All right, get on the same level with them if they're small people.
Goggles up.
Yeah, lift up your goggles. Great.
Introduce myself and ask their name.
Yeah.
Introduce myself and ask their name. Awesome. So I'm gonna time us out, even though we're all like, we could probably keep going. But so those behaviors make a great foundation to meeting a student. They're incredibly useful, and they I think I said this out of order, but so those behaviors are really useful when we're meeting a group of students, and they're really helpful tools to stick in your back pocket if you're a new ski instructor or an experienced ski instructor just trying to go into default mode so we can start to build a connection, right? And those behaviors are what's called a prescriptive solution. So in a prescriptive solution to a problem, we assume that an expert can give us really good advice and has the right answer. And we assume that the variables are fixed. So I've got this problem and I have a known variable, right? My problem is I'm teaching a lesson, it's starting. My variable is my students are showing up, right? So that would be a prescriptive solution. We can have a right best answer. And prescriptive solutions, like I said, are really good for training new staff, really good for laying a foundation, and really good to just have tools when we don't necessarily have understanding. And an adaptive problem is when we assume that we have unknown variables and an infinite number of solutions to any problem. If you have an adaptive problem, we can't just go to an expert for advice. There's not a right way to do it. And this is how, think about how we expect our candidates in level 3 assessments to talk about technical skills. They're not saying, okay, you are balanced on your inside ski. This is the right progression. We're going to follow steps X, Y, and Z, and we're going to do blank. No, they say, I noticed you're doing X with your skiing. We're going to shift your skiing in this particular way. They're watching the student. They're noticing if they're making the changes they want, and they're adapting as they go along, right? So they're not assuming fixed variables. They're changing as they go along. And that requires a level of understanding that's a lot higher, and an ability and a comfort in paying attention as you go along and adapting to the solution. And we expect that with our technical skills, and we expect it with our teaching skills. And until now, we really haven't expected it with people skills. We've started and ended with, this is how you do this, right? So if you saw my people skills presentation at InterSki, one of the things I showed is a video of a kid, or a picture of a kid who looks really pissed off, right? And if you've got that pissed off kid in your class, who's like, you know, I don't know he's pissed off, but his eyes are furrowed and he's like kind of grimacing and he looks like he's ready to punch someone. And if I have that kid in my class, smiling, lifting my goggles up, shaking his hand, asking him some questions. Those might not be my best response in this moment. Often those are great responses. And if I have the kid, I might shift to, I don't remember which person said it because your voices were all over the place, but like kneeling down, getting on their level, trying to figure out what they like to do, maybe throwing some snowballs or just kicking some snow around. But instead of going to the prescriptive approach, being able to assess the situation, say this is situation doesn't fit my standard variables, and being able to shift and adapt. So this is the primary difference between how people skills, we've talked about it in the past, and how we're talking about it now, is in addition to having those prescriptive strategies, we're also, or prescriptive behaviors, we're also trying to have strategies and end states and goals and targets so that instructors know where they're trying to build to and can shift to another tactic if they find that something's not working.
Awesome. A note to everyone here, that presentation that Ann is referencing, you can find the link to that, to the YouTube of that in the June 5th notes. So if you go to the folder, and again, if you have trouble finding that, just go ahead and email us. Awesome. Thank you, Ann. That is so much more tangible. I know, I know that like there are some, I found some really useful resources. So one being the specific slide. If you all can see that, you'll see this.
You might need to get closer.
Oh, how are we doing? I feel like the light's terrible.
Still fuzzy.
There we go. It's the prescriptive and versus adaptive slide that you reference in the presentation. And what I like is everything that I've heard you mention here falls neatly within some kind of general overview words that for me, I feel like I could take out and use. So I really appreciate that. Thank you for putting on that. I'd love to ask you to dive in a little bit very specifically into interpersonal skills. So specifically referencing back to your two specific thoughts.
Okay. So as, let me see if I can organize my thoughts. So as we have been talking about people skills, using a ton of different resources and gathering information, and then trying to answer the question. So within the task force, we're working on the heady information, which is, you know, what does this look like in person? How do we dial this down? And as we've been in those spots, we've also gotten questions from other divisions and ed staffs trying to figure this out and saying like, okay, but what is the essence? Like, what do we really need to know when you talk about this? Like, what is foundational to this? And some pretty clear thoughts have emerged. One is that the definition of people skills is the ability to effectively gather information and use that information to adapt in order to build trust. There is no point in adapting unless we've gathered information to have a good idea that our adaptation is going to be successful. So one half of people skills or interpersonal skills is how do you effectively gather information? And as a place to start, that is, I think, one of the ways that we can start training, talking to other instructors about where are we gathering the information and how do we get it? And so what's really cool about this conversation is the seed, the kernel of the thought of one part of this actually came from Howard in a conversation that he and I had this fall. And so when we're talking about gathering information, we have appropriated the concept of situational awareness to interpersonal skills. And so there's that definition, right? And I'm going to start and give you two tools that support that definition when we're thinking about how do we train ourselves. If anybody needs me to re-say the definition, you can raise your hand or something. But so the first tool is situational awareness. And this is that how do we gather information? Situational awareness is a term that was coined by Dr. Micah Ensley from the US Air Force. And she effectively used it to describe what ACEs, like pilots from the Vietnam War, did to effectively shoot down their targets and how they were so successful. And what situational awareness was for them was the ability to gather information from a ton of different sources and use that information to anticipate the likely future or predict, right? So it's the ability to look around you, notice all of the things, and then use it to predict something that's going to happen. And I'll give you an example of that. You are teaching in a lesson, and you have a husband-wife combo showing up. Just one kernel of information. Think of, you could even write it down if you're taking notes. What are 2 things you're anticipating might happen, could be a possible outcome in this lesson? Maria's laughing.
I know, sorry.
I've even taught your husband-wife combo.
I know. Well, they would be at different levels. That would be the first thing. And,
Okay, right?
And there might be a little bit of conflict in what they want, what they each need. So I would have to adapt to make sure they're both happy.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sure I saw a bunch of smiles happen when I gave that information, right? It's this data point that almost every instructor has had experience working with a variety of couples in lessons over time, right? And it's not that every couple is going to be the same. I can't assume they're all going to be like that. And I can make a pretty educated guess that if they start coaching each other, things are going to go south real fast.
Yeah.
Right? So when we're talking about situational awareness, that is a concrete example of how we do it. When we're in the snow sports world, we want to look at 3 components of situational awareness. The first one, and we're going to start big and then zoom in, right? Because another piece of information that I find really useful when I think about this is the well-documented fact that people behave differently in different circumstances. And so our behavior can be anticipated better in context versus out of context. And the context that we're in actually influences that. Another example, my relationship with candidates when I am training them, candidates for an assessment, when I am training them versus when I am examining them is totally different. When I'm training them, we're buds, we're laughing, everything's hilarious. And when I'm examining them, I have to work my tail off so that I'm not the most intimidating person on the planet to these folks, right? Situation. The situation is different. The interaction is going to be different. So as we start big and then zoom in, the first component to look at would be the environment. And I gave you the exam example for an environment, but there are also the simple ones of, you know, is it snowy and cold outside? Is something that affects the environment? I don't know how you all do group lessons, but I know at our kids program, sometimes I start with a group and then I lose a couple, gain a couple, right? And there's a shift in my group, and that's an environment that's stressful for some of the kids and changes the dynamic in the group. So thinking about what is the context and environment within which your group exists. I've been doing these webinars, the last like 2 session webinars, and had folks write examples of successfully building trust and unsuccessfully building trust, and they described all these components in situational awareness. We build trust when it is sunny and the snow is perfect. We struggle to build trust when it is cold and snowy and when it's icy, consistently. And I was like, wow, we can really dial into the situations. Like if it's a sunny, beautiful day, we don't need to add anything to our interpersonal skills. We need to focus on the hard days, right? So first component is the environment. The second component is the group and the people who are immediately surrounding that group. So that could include parents, but what is the group of people and what is the dynamic of that group of people? And part of this is recognizing that the social experience of individuals within a group can dramatically impact their ability to learn. So if we're having a negative social experience, we actually go through fight or flight. And that completely shuts off our learning centers in our brain, completely interrupts our ability to gather information and to experiment and play and learn. And it also reduces our desire to come back and join this group again, right? So the group dynamic in and of itself is critical to how individuals experience the day. Similarly, parents and their influence can also adjust that. And the converse of that challenging dynamic is that people in a positive social dynamic dramatically increase their ability to learn, dramatically increase their desire to experiment and play and fail. And so if what we're trying to do is teach some kind of snow sports, the group dynamic is actually critical to educating. With a negative group dynamic, we're going to be really hard pressed to build skills. And to my very few data points of people's challenges to build trust and positives to build trust, we have a really hard time building trust if there's a split.
Say more.
If we have an ability split, especially when one person is slow in a group, we struggle to build trust both with the person who's slow and with the folks who are faster. And for those of you who want to get super nerdy, I'll mention this as a side and then we can like email conversation it later. But what I noticed is when there's a split, our tendency is it's a technical problem, right? Technical skills don't match. And we try to fix it with technical solutions. And the technical solutions are, we spend a lot of time with the person who's going slowly, we reduce the train, we do all these teaching things, right? And one of the negative outcomes of that split is a social dynamic. And we rarely use interpersonal skills to address that problem. So instead of like buddying students up, creating a group puzzle, trying to create an environment in which people are high-fiving each other or taking care of each other and having that be the emphasis, when we go to a technical split, it tends to be less successful. And when we go to a social fix, it tends to be more successful, these are my like anecdotal, interesting nuggets that are not proven yet, but I'm curious about.
And that links back to something that I feel like has been a common theme here on the show, is that this idea, it's like, we're looking to get people, have our students want to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're looking for a student who leaves their lesson or who says, I've had a great day, and we're looking for that return experience. And so at the end of the day, it's like, it kind of doesn't really matter if they got to XYZ run, right? Like, so this quantifiable mark of achievement, we're looking more for, so being socially accepted. And what does that look like?
Yeah. And do they have, I mean, we've all seen it. If you have a group that's bonded well together, they come back, they want to come back for each other, as we're part of that group and we're not the only component in that relationship. So part of interpersonal skills, once we've gathered that information, is also, can we cultivate a group environment? And it really is a cultivation, and some instructors do it really well. And then the last component of that is, and let me back up, within the group that also includes individuals. So sometimes you've got something going on with one individual, and obviously we want to pay attention to those things as well and gather information. And then the last component of that is with yourself, and identifying what's going on in any given day. And we all have, I think of them as like global lifelong trends and daily short-term trends that affect how we interact with other people and how we do our jobs. An example of the global long-term trends would be our value systems, how we were raised, how we've learned to communicate over time. Those are kind of like the global long-term systems. And the short-term systems are, did I have coffee this morning? Is it March or is it December? How many days have I taught recently? How is my relationship with my significant other? Those are things that affect me and how I show up on a given day. And so if we're looking at how do we gather information, those are the places where we gather information so that we can predict how things are going to go, right? So it's like you put yourself in a situation where it's cold and snowy and nasty. We've got a group level split that is going to stay for the rest of the day. I haven't had my coffee and I didn't sleep very well last night. And now we can anticipate that without significant effort on my part, this day is probably going to go south. Because in general, I've seen each of these individual factors be challenging. So that then requires me to make some deliberate adjustments to be able to influence the group differently, right? And I'm going to talk less about the specific sexy adjustments and more about where are we gathering the information. Because like I said, if we've got good information, we can make good decisions.
Mm.
So that was a very long-winded tool number one.
I love that though. I mean, I think that really this is what we're working towards is really having a deeper understanding and about like how, like what does this really look like? How can we apply this? And what are some examples of what success is? I think so often something that I offered to you a couple of days ago is this idea of like, oh, well, I've got the people skills, like that's no problem for me. And it's like, well, yeah, you know, maybe you've got really a nice, like the right personality, or you were hired for that, like that's all fine and great, but this is very different. This is teachable. I look at it, it's like I like to liken this skill set and these fundamentals a lot to the person who goes out and can ski or snowboard, and then they think they can teach it. And we all here as educators know, like there's a really big gap between that. And we also know as instructors that oftentimes when we get the person who can go out and ski or snowboard, not someone, we have some things that we get to mold and shape differently. So there's quite the gap. You offered some really nice insight to the difference between like overconfident and underconfidence in regards to the development of people skills. I'd love for you to share with the group before we move on, if that's all right.
I'm going to tie that to tool number two. So I'm going to take your
let's do it.
question and I'm going to make it turn into what I want it to be, which I think are related anyway.
Fabulous. And I do want to just grab permission from the group. Just given the time, it does look like we're going to go over a little bit. So if you need to take care of yourself and log off promptly at 5, please take care of that. I will be mindful of the time regardless. All right, please, Ann.
Okay. So tool number two is very related to tool number one. And it is being able to differentiate what is mine from what is everyone else's. And we all live in a world, I can send you my sources for this later, but we all live in a world, we all do this, where we live in our heads and we pass through the world as observers. And what is in our heads are stories that we've made up. We do it all the time. When I gave you the husband-wife team, we all jumped right into the stories we've made up. And those stories are incredibly helpful for part of that situational awareness and their assumptions. And when they're incorrect assumptions and we don't test them, we can go down some negative pathways or unproductive, right? Like that's when we really have the most conflict with folks we're working with. And I recently was working with a group of instructors and one of them told me this story about not building trust. And he went down this pathway of, they were from the South. He said they didn't look like they exercised very much. And then he went to, they shouldn't be here. They don't they clearly have no business skiing. They don't care about their health and they don't eat well. And it was like watching this just massive leap of generalizations was such a glaring example, right? Where we see humans and we do this and we make up these stories, and making up these stories is okay and normal. And when our observations of other people leap to a generalization, that's when we want to pay attention, right? So if I say, Ellen, I'm going to pick on you because I just noticed you touched the back of your neck, right? So if I say, okay, Ellen just touched the back of her neck like this and happened to be looking down. And I say, when people do that, it's because they're pissed off. Ellen is pissed off at me because she doesn't like the topic of the conversation, right? And I'm being really, I'm exaggerating this a lot, right? But if I don't test that assumption, then I'm going to behave differently and interact differently with Ellen because I've just assumed that she's pissed off at me and she hates this whole Apres talk, right? Versus if I say, hey, Ellen, I noticed you just touched your neck and I have these observations like you were looking down. Is everything okay? She says, yeah, I'm taking notes. I'm just over here. You know, I'm engaged and I'm paying attention to what you're doing. If I've tested that assumption, then I am going to mitigate the worst outcomes that could happen, right? Where I make an assumption and without testing it, I make a leap of abstraction, and our interaction becomes one that's based on two totally different stories that are made up in our heads. And so when I say the difference between me and you, right? What Ellen did with her hand, where she touched her head and was looking down, that's Ellen's, right? That was her behavior, she did it. I observed it. touching her neck, looking down, right? The part where Ellen is pissed off, that's mine. That's my story. I made that up. And so when we interpret other people, that's our story that we made up. And our role, and one of the most important components of this, is to check our assumptions. A, recognize that we've made an assumption, and B, check the assumption. Because what we want is for the, like, Ellen's intention and her behavior and my interpretation of that to be as close as possible. We've got tons of tools, asking questions, continued observation, checking in with other people in the group if we feel like we can't talk to Ellen. We've got tons of different tools to do that. And the challenge is recognizing that we've made an assumption. And so identifying the difference between what is mine and what belongs to other people. And we tend to think I'm gonna tangent a little bit, but so let's say that instead Ellen had walked out of the door and slammed the door. And it pissed me off, right? Like, what's she doing slamming doors? I'm all pissed off, right? I'm like, Ellen, you pissed me off. Nope. Ellen slammed the door. That's Ellen's. Pissed off, that's mine. I did that. That's my interpretation of what just happened. And being able to differentiate those two things and take ownership for what's mine, the pissed off and the assumption of earlier, those are mine. Ellen owns the behaviors. She also owns whatever intent was behind the behaviors, but that's not mine. So I need to check my assumptions and recognize when I'm making those. Did I lose anyone there? Lots of head shakes, great. So tool number one, how do we gather information? And tool number two, while we're gathering that information, how do we differentiate what's mine from what's everybody else's?
I'd like to say, I'd like to say that what you're talking about is really communication. Instead of words, they're using actions and this and that, and it's your interpretation and how you react, and you could be talking past each other if you don't really understand what's going on in the other person's head, and that's the essence of communication. And this is nothing more than that. And so you really have to, like you said, you really have to know who you are and how you understand and relate to these things rather than being judgmental.
So true. And the truth of the matter is that we are judgmental, and we're going to be, and it's going to happen. And it's, can we recognize that that's happened versus do we just go on the judgment? And this is all rooted in communication theory. There's a model by a gentleman named John Wallen. I can send all these things to Melodie, called the Interpersonal Gap, which is foundational to a lot of this material. But it's communication theory. And so if you look at the fundamentals, the way they're broken out, trust is the end state. That's the goal we're trying to get to. Communication is the means we have to get there. And the information comes from me and you and the environment. And then the action happens on me and you and the environment. Well, not so much on the environment, but.
That's awesome.
May I make a comment? It's Howard here. I think we can't neglect the importance of nonverbal cues from the instructor to the student that they then assume mean something. And I'll use my own example of my brow furrows from years of being stern and worried, make me look like I have a resting bastard face. So as a result, people respond to that as though I'm mad at them. And then they come back mad at me. And so this goes back and forth for a while until it devolves. And I've kind of noticed this in some of my colleagues, and I've noticed this in some of our trainers. And some of our trainers will have this face, and it's never clear whether what we're doing is satisfactory. If they were smiling, we'd be better.
Right, because they'd catch you doing, yeah. You'd know that you're doing it right. It
doesn't matter if we know we're doing it right. We just know that the trainer is satisfied.
Howard, I'm going to take your point and build on it, which is I talked about a really small subset of what is mine and differentiating between me and other people. And Howard just hit on this interesting spot where, okay, if I'm over here And then, or we'll put Howard over here because it's his story, and his students are over here, right? Howard's behavior, furrowing his brow, that's Howard's. It's fact, it happened, everybody agrees. His students' interpretation that Howard is angry, that belongs to the students. However, if Howard notices that his students frequently interpret his behaviors as angry, Howard can influence that. He can recognize that when he's furrowed his brow, people interpret it this way, and then he can adapt to fix it. So now we just kind of delved somewhat into that adaptation realm, which is we can't own what other people think of our behaviors necessarily, but what we can do is influence the behaviors that they see. Thank you for that point, Howard.
So good.
It's baked into 201.
And I do want to push us forward because I do know that we have a hard stop at 5:15. Like we just make sure that we're off the off here. So one of the things I want to take some ownership for is Ann and I will connect, and I'll make sure that I have some baseline notes to offer within the notes that you can find in the folder. And again, if you have trouble with that, just reach out and ask. But I feel like there's so much more that we could be digging into here. And I'm hopeful that we can book you for a future session. But do you want to take a couple minutes and kind of wrap up what you've talked about so far?
I would take a couple minutes to reiterate it, but I'd be more, I'm maybe more curious about if people have questions.
Fabulous.
It's like the most concise, pointed I've been in a while, but so if I were going to reiterate, people skills is the ability to effectively gather information and use that information to adapt to build trust.
Awesome.
Situational awareness is how we gather that information, and an important component of situational awareness, so much so that we've kind of separated out, is being able to identify what belongs to me and what belongs to everybody else.
Awesome.
And those are kind of like the foundational skills. Once we have those figured out, we can build on them.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
We do have a couple of minutes for questions. So if you have any, it's easiest for me to call on you if you raise your hand. Yeah, Jimmy.
I just wanted to kind of bring up a point, and maybe Ann can give her thoughts on it. Ann touched almost on, without saying the word, racism, which of course we're all thinking about right now. And I've been thinking a lot about words I've heard a lot of ski instructors say, usually not concerning Black people, but sometimes, usually concerning, at my ski resort, subcontinent, Asians, Indians, Pakistan, that these people just can't ski. And I was hoping to hear your thoughts, best to address that in our locker room with our instructors.
Well, this is all on my mind a lot lately. And I think many people, I can't speak for people of non-dominant cultures because I am part of the dominant white culture. I think I have heard many suggestions that as white people, it's our job to police ourselves, and that the best way we can be allies to minorities is to police each other. And so bringing it up, I think that can feel really scary. I think this organization, like in locker rooms and in some of the cultures that evolve, we're a little bit behind, honestly, other organizations and other places. And it can feel, those conversations can feel scary and like something that's not common among our peers and in our locker rooms. And so like as a tool, you could use the step from observation. This is a person from from Southeast Asia, right? To generalization, this person can't ski, right? That is racism. It's all part and parcel of the same thing. And so it starts with the same foundational component of having an observation and making a judgment that's unfounded. And the same skills that are required for cultural competency are the same foundational skills that are required for interpersonal skills, are the same foundational skills that are required for organizational leadership. They're all really inextricably linked. And in my mind, this curriculum is written and created in such a way that it can hopefully begin to encompass those conversations as well.
Awesome. And I just posted in the chat here if folks specifically are interested in some resources, I can email that. And if you reach out, I'd be happy to provide you with some lists for resources to educate yourself on this specific topic.
Yeah, that was a great question, Jimmy. Thanks.
Yeah, very pertinent.
Thank you.
All right, I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you before we wrap it up. Really quickly, describe an average moment for you that brings joy.
Average moment for me that brings joy?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, my dog is not super affectionate. She likes to be around people, but she doesn't like to be pet. And so she'll come up to me some mornings and just like nuzzle her head right into my legs and get some pets. And those are pretty joyful. That's a pretty like average moment that brings a lot of joy. Yeah.
I love that. Oh, thank you for that. What is a book that you're reading or have read recently?
Ooh, okay. Well, based on Jimmy's question, I'm going to give one that is just one of the most beautiful books I've read in a really long time, which is a book called Homegoing by AASI. Her last name is spelled Gyasi, I believe. And it's fiction, but an incredible page turner about the experience of both Africans and African Americans, and it sort of tracks through history. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Strongly
I'll
recommended.
that title and put it into the notes if anyone's interested. Awesome. Thanks, Ann.
Yep.
What's your favorite snack?
Ooh, favorite snack. Oh, okay. Well, I'm a chocolate addict. And those of you who live in Oregon may have seen on the shelves something called Honey Mamas that have started coming out. And they're these like little square, they're made out of chocolate and honey. And then they have like a mint flavor and a cardamom flavor. And it's like crack. It's like fudge. So if you see Honey Mamas. Yeah.
If you ever make it over here to Central Oregon, I always have some in my fridge. So prepare for you.
We may have talked about that last summer.
We probably did. All right. What's a podcast that you recently listened to and loved?
Ooh, specific episode or?
Whatever.
I'm a huge consumer of Brene Brown. Info, output, books. Yeah, we've got some hand claps. Huge fan. And I am completely blanking on the name of her podcast right now. But she started a podcast. What is it?
Unlocking Us.
Yes, thank you. And I have not listened to all the episodes, but I've listened to a few, and I could listen to Brene for hours.
Likewise. I do think it's worth mentioning that that some of the I'm telling my story that you brought up in the description today, you can find that in Call to Courage, which is a segment from Brene on Netflix if you're interested. So I'll also put that in there, and you and I can converse on that as well. And then if you could share with us the best and worst parts of your job.
The best and worst parts of my job. Which job?
Let's talk about ski.
I mean, the best part of my job is the same as everybody else's best part of their job, right? Like the moment when you're coaching someone and they figure it out and it's not, I haven't delivered it, they have discovered it and then they own it and it's theirs. And like, they can, yeah. When they, like, I have these two women who started taking themselves to camp where like they separate themselves from their husbands and their families and they just go ski with me. And they couldn't ski Black Diamonds a year ago. And this year they were like, had an afternoon that they were free and they went and skied the powder in the trees without me and just like had a ball. That, you know, we all have those stories. That's why we're here. Yeah, best and worst. The worst part of my job. I mean, I'm an examiner. And if you're an examiner, you have to tell people that they didn't reach their goals on a given day. And that I think is one of the most important things that I do, because to be able to be to try to be kind and human in those moments is, I think, is critical to having to have those moments, and it's also terrible. So yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I want to thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. I see a handful of logistical questions in the chat about where to find information and whatnot. I'm going to do my best to update today's notes. So if you go to the June 12th one sheet in the Google folder, most of this will be here. If there was something specific that you're looking for that I don't post, please reach out to me. Again, my email, I think, is on every single one of those pages. So feel free to connect back to me. And mark your calendars for June 26th. Katie Foyt, who's on here, she'll be joining us as our special guest. She'll specifically be talking about how to practice people skills, which we've been talking about over the last few weeks. And we'll go from there. So thank you, Ann, so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for spending your time. And
Yeah.
again, check the notes. And again, ask me questions. I really appreciate it when you speak out. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.